Hey everyone, Andrew here, and today I'm going to be talking about a television show. Last year I did a comparison of Showtime's Camelot and BBC's Merlin because they were two Arthurian shows that came out around the same-ish time and had similar ideas or followed the similar basic story string of this is an Arthurian legend told in a slightly different way. And I thought it was interesting to compare and contrast those two. And just this last month or so, I went on Netflix and I started a series at random that I looked sort of interesting, but I didn't know anything about it. And as I'm watching it, I realized very quickly that it was an Arthurian-based series. And that show was Netflix's Cursed. And this one's a bit different. It's told from the perspective of Nimawe, who is the Lady of the Lake. And I had to actually look that up at first because I was like, I know that name. Why do I know that name? And yeah, so it's a little bit different. And it had enough distinctions from the other ones that I thought it would be a good idea to talk about it and then compare to the three. And if you really want to hear my thoughts on Camelot and Merlin, BBC Merlin, I will include the link to that here in the corner or down below. I went into depth about each of those shows and what the basic plot is and what's going on with it. And I don't really feel the need to repeat that again. I do apologize for the look of my face right now. I got in a fight with the concrete and the concrete won. But yeah, I'm fine. It's just scrapes and they'll go away eventually. Hopefully I'm not scarred here and here. That'd be sucky. But yeah, apologies for the distraction on that. I'm gonna go over the plot of Cursed and give you my thoughts on it and what it did well and what it didn't do well. Then I'm going to go through each of the main characters and which version of the shows did the best of that, and then just compare all three shows in general and my thoughts of which one was best and which one was worst. I will start off by saying Cursed already starts off at a disadvantage against Merlin because much like Camelot, it was a one-season show that got canceled. So so Merlin automatically has an advantage of it being a complete series, as opposed to Cursed and Camelot. That said, there's a lot of shows that I liked that got canceled after one season, and if you do it well, it can still be interesting and compelling and well made. So Cursed is a Netflix series. It's based off a graphic novel by Frank Miller and Tom Wheeler. The story of Cursed follows Nimawe, who, like I said, becomes the Lady of the Lake. She is the daughter of a village priestess, and she has a special... She is a fae, so she is a magical being, and she has a extremely powerful connection to the nature and the world around her, and doesn't seem to have control over it. So she can basically, if she has a bad mood, bad things will happen. So of course, the entire village sees her as a monster, and they bully and pick on her for it. Because yeah, the one thing you want to do when you have a person who, she has a bad day, could murder people, let's make fun of her and make sure her day is terrible. So of course, bullies pick on her and try to make her day terrible, and then Nimawe uses her magic to try to nearly kill them. Nimawe's mother wants her to become a priestess and take over the temple and, guide the village to prosperity. Nimawe wants nothing to do with this, so she takes off with her friend and they go to a nearby village to catch a boat to go anywhere else. They end up missing the boat, but they run into this young knight named Arthur, and Arthur comes off very charming and very sweet, but you can tell there's something off about him because the way he talks is very what you expect of a proper royal knight. But the group that he's traveling with that are supposed to be other knights are very sketchy or very dark and threatening and even try to attack the girls, Nimawe and her friend, at a point. Nimawe after the attack, ends up leaving and heading back towards the village, but the village has been attacked by the Red Paladin. Now, the Red Paladin is a subsection of the Roman Church in England, and they are there to wipe out the Fae people by any means necessary. And so they are going around slaughtering men, women, children. Any association with the Fae, you are dead. The most standout of the Paladins is one known as the Weeping Monk, who is basically clad all in red, dual-wielding swords, and has black dripping from his eyes that makes it look like he's weeping. Or he may or may not be crying oil. I'm not sure. But yeah, he's basically goes around the village just slaughtering everyone, and he can sense the Fae and find them and track them. But he also has this thing up there, he doesn't kill the children. He does turn a blind eye when the others murder children, but he does not do it himself. Nimawe finds her mother during the attack. Her mother hands her this bound up object. She says, "You need to take this, you need to run. You need to give this to Merlin, he'll know what to do." So Nimawe takes it, runs, gets attacked by the paladin, uses her powers, murders all three of them in extremely violent ways, basically turns them into trees to an extent, and she uncovers the object and reveals that it is a sword, the Sword of Power, also known as Excalibur, but it's not ever referred to as that name in this. But this is a sword created by Merlin, and it is imbued with magic, and basically anyone that touches it becomes extremely proficient with the sword and can kill almost anybody with little knowledge of how to actually wield a sword, but it also tends to drive the wielder insane. We then cut over to Merlin, who is magical advisor to Uther Pendragon. And Merlin is an extreme drunk and has no magic, because he is the person who created the sword, and the sword, upon creation, took his magic from him. So he's been getting by on tricks and manipulation, but when the sword is unsheathed and used, Merlin can sense it and can feel it, and we see that the sword literally was made from him, because there's like a tattoo on his body stretching down his body of the sword, of where the sword was cut out from him. Merlin tells Uther Pendragon, the sword power is out there. Give me a few days. I will do everything I can to get you that sword as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the whole time he's planning to destroy the sword, because he knows that sword is cursed and that anyone that wields it will go crazy and it's too dangerous for this world. Nimawe ends up running into Arthur again, who has separated himself from that low-live group that he was hanging out with. He agrees to help her get her to safety. He sees the sword that she used and how powerful it is, so he knocks her unconscious and takes the sword, and then takes Nimawe to this nunnery that his sister Morgana lives in, and takes the sword and leaves. Nimawe wakes up and is enraged that Arthur's betrayed her and stolen the sword, and she ends up having to dress up as a nun because there are Red Paladins in the nunnery, and they are there trying to heal the people that Nimawe had the forest attack. And basically are saying, you need to heal these guys. If they are not healed, we are slaughtering all of you in this nunnery. And Nimawe tries to save them and tries to use her Fey magic to stop it, but they're too far gone and they end up dying. Morgana helps Nimawe escape, and then Morgana ends up escaping on her own a little bit later. Then the Red Paladins attack and slaughter everyone in the nunnery except for this young nun who is clearly crazy and just gives herself over to the Red Paladins, I will do anything you ask. So they send her out to go and infiltrate a Fey village and become part of the Fey and destroy them from the inside. Arthur has gone to his uncle, because we find out that Arthur's father was a royal knight but had a falling out and had basically his entire legacy thrown through the mud, and Arthur's trying to redeem his legacy. So he goes to his uncle to have his uncle enter him in this tournament so he can use the Sword of Power to win the tournament. His uncle is a rich aristocrat. He's also an ass. A guy who literally still mad at his son because his son didn't die honorably in battle, type of thing. It's you could have been a warrior, instead you died, and I hate you forever type of person. And agrees to help Arthur, but Arthur ends up getting attacked and knocked out, and the sword gets taken from him. Nimawe ends up hiding away in this caravan with these Fae who are traveling the roads. They get her safely through this Red Paladin checkpost. They agree to meet on later. Nimawe ends up running into Arthur, who apologizes for the things he did and agrees to help, wants to help her and does everything he wants. She really wants nothing to do with him, but he kind of tags along without her being able to say much of anything. She ends up finding the sword, goes back to the encampment, and all of the Fae people have been slaughtered by the Red Paladins. This enrages Nimawe, so she pulls out the sword, finds where the Red Paladins are bathing, and then slaughters them all single-handedly. And she ends up developing this reputation and starts being referred to as the Wolfblood Witch, who the Red Paladins are in desperate desire to kill, even more so than before. Nimawe and Arthur end up in this secret Fae village to try to hide out, and there they run into Morgana, who's also there, so yay. But they also run into the Green Knight, who is the warrior of the Fae, the protector of the forest, and he reveals his helmet to show that he's actually an old friend of Nimawe's named Gawain. And he and Arthur are automatically at odds because Gawain doesn't trust anyone of human, and Arthur doesn't like the fact that Nimawe knows Gawain because he's jealous. But the two end up deciding that they're going to work together, and Arthur and Gawain go out to try and take out this small troop of Red Paladins. During all this, Nimawe has sent a letter out to Merlin telling him that she has the sword and that they need to meet and discuss what happens next. Which is a good thing because that letter shows up right as Uther Pendragon is about to execute Merlin, because he basically disappeared for a long time without telling him and has been clearly working behind his back. And Merlin has been playing the two sides of this brewing war against each other, because there is Uther Pendragon and then there is the Northern King, who claims to be the only true heir to the throne. Meanwhile, Merlin is the only one that knows, yes, he is the only one that has an actual claim to the throne, because Uther Pendragon is not the son of the first Pendragon, that the mother had a stillborn and they swapped out the babies. And when Uther finds this out, he basically poisons his mother and watches her die. Merlin was about to be executed, but Uther gets that letter and realizes he can't do it, otherwise he won't get his hands on the sword. So he sends Merlin out to meet with Nimawe. Nimawe and Merlin meet up, and Merlin shows her the memories of his past, and we find out that he not only did he know Nimawe's mother, that he is actually her father. And that the man who raised her and hated her all of her life did so because he knew she wasn't his daughter. We also find out that Merlin used to wield the Sword of Power, and that he'd used that sword to slaughter villages and towns of the Roman Church in his bid to keep the Fae safe and to keep himself in power. And Nimawe doesn't believe that she can trust him for this and all these negative things about her. So she's like, I'm not working with you. I'm done. I'm leaving. And she finds out that Gawain and Arthur are in trouble, that they're basically surrounded in a no-win scenario, shows up with the Sword of Power, slaughters all of the red soldiers, and manages to save everybody. She returns to the Fae village and tells them that she will lead the Faes into protection. She will keep them safe. She is now the Queen of the Fae. And so she leads them into a local village and takes it over and uses it as a strong outpost. It happens to be the same village that Arthur's uncle lived at, so they take over his house and kick him out. During all this, Merlin has gone between the two different kings, between Uther and the Ice King, trying to make a deal to keep Nimawe safe, because now all he wants to do is keep his daughter from being killed. He's even willing to let them have the swords if it can save his daughter, which is a complete kind of 180 from how he was for the first chunk of the series. But gets an offer from one of them, goes to Nimawe, tells her the offer. He's like, oh, well, this one will let you live, but this one will kill you. It's like, okay, well, what would happen to the Fae? And eventually Uther agrees to give the Fae people boats so they can travel north, because Uther doesn't super care about taking out the Fae. He just wants the Sword of Power, and he's willing to let them leave and never come back. This infuriates the Red Paladins, who have been working on the side of Uther, and so they spring a trap on the boats and try to slaughter all of the Fae that are escaping. Nimawe agrees, turns herself in, but she gives the Sword of Power to Morgana, who is supposed to escape in the night. Also, during all this, Gawain had been captured by the Red Paladin, and the Red Paladin had basically tortured him and trying to get information out of him. He had not talked, and they severed his cords so he couldn't stand or walk or even make any attempt to escape, which is too bad because there's a young boy from the Fae that tries to rescue him named Squirrel, and he's not able to. Squirrel gets captured, and the Red Paladins are gonna murder him and use him as an example. But the Weeping Paladin does not like killing children. He does not agree with that, especially because he is actually a Fae, and they've been using him to hunt the Fae because he could sense his own kind. He decides that he's going to rescue Squirrel and keep him from getting killed. He fights off the elite paladin, like 6 of them by himself, and manages to kill all of them. He and the young boy are riding away, and he asks the young boy what his real name is, and the young boy is like, my real name is Percival. I don't like it. I prefer Squirrel. And Percival asks the Weeping Paladin what his real name is, and he says, Lancelot. It used to be Lancelot. The Fae people that were under attack by the boats are rescued by this pirate queen known as the Red Spear. And so she and Arthur team up to save the Fae from there, and they have managed to rescue some of them. Nimawe is about to be executed for not giving up the sword. Morgana, who is on the run, decides that she has to return and rescue Nimawe. Earlier in the story, she ran into this woman known as the Widow, who was basically in a black veil, and you couldn't see what she was. And she told Morgana, if we see each other again, I will kill you. And then Morgana shows up to the camp and runs directly into the Widow. And then it cuts. And then the next thing we see is Nimue about to be murdered, and then the Widow shows up in front of them, lifts the veil, and it's Morgana under the hood. Somehow she had become the Red Widow. She gives the Sword of Power to Nimue, and the two of them rescue Merlin and fight off to this little, basically narrow walkway over a waterfall. They're just about to escape, but Merlin's having a really hard time of it, and the crazy nun lady from the first episode shows up and has a bow and arrow and shoots 3 arrows into Nimue, who falls off the waterfall into the water below. This enrages Merlin, who grabs the sword and gets his power back and starts shooting off lightning and slaughters all of the Red Paladins that were coming after them, except for the one girl who actually killed his daughter. She survives, because you have to have a possible villain for the next season that doesn't come. And then he uses the sword to have him and Morgana poof away. We see Nimue under the water, being washed downstream, and that is the last scene we see before the roll of credits. Yeah, that ending is not great. It does not help the series in the long run. But for the most part, there are some really interesting, really good things about the series. I like the fact that Nimue is the main character as opposed to one of the more common Arthurian characters, because we don't know as much about Nimue as we do with the other ones. I'm sure there's a whole full history of Nimue, but it's one that is not as well known in the psyche. It's like everyone knows about King Arthur and Merlin and Guinevere and Lancelot, but Nimue is a little bit more vague, and you can work a little bit more with that story and make some real changes to it. The effects are extremely good. The character stories are interesting enough. The fighting is really good. They have really good action scenes and really good battles. It has its moments, but it's like there's also a lot of things that it doesn't do well. The story gets extremely convoluted as it goes on. There's a lot of stuff that isn't explained or isn't explained well. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, the Widow is just this thing that kind of shows up at a certain point, and then somehow Morgana becomes the Widow, and it's like, what? Okay. I also found myself losing interest as the series went on. Like, by the time that she, like, named herself the Fae Queen, I was kind of like, really? And I actually took a pause from this because it was a little too much, and I only watched the last 3 episodes about a week later, because it was just a lot. And it had some stuff that worked for it, but overall, it's not one I would say I would recommend, because it's like it starts off strong, but then it just kind of completely falls apart by the end of it. I like the Sword of Power in this one. Like, Excalibur in this one is probably the most interesting version of Excalibur itself. It has a thing that they kind of hinted at in BBC's Merlin, but they never actually did, which is in BBC's Merlin, they were like stated, oh yeah, only the true king of England can wield this sword. Only Arthur Pendragon can wield it. Anyone else who tries to wield it will go insane. I was like, that's kind of cool and kind of interesting, and it's like they try to do that, and they never really did that with the BBC's Merlin. It never really went that far. Merlin always took the sword away from them before they lost their mind, and it just never got to realize. This one, you can actually see the sword corrupting people and making them more violent. Even Nimawe, who seems to have a better handle of it than some people, becomes far more aggressive and far more violent, and ends up, towards the end of the series, murdering one of the Fae people because they attacked one of the humans. And she, like, hates herself for doing, like, I've lost control and I shouldn't have done that. And like, what is happening to me? And it's like, well, you're wielding a sword that makes people go crazy, and you know you're wielding a sword that makes people go crazy. So let's go character by character and say which versions of these are the best. So Arthur Pendragon, which is the best Arthur? That's going to be the one from BBC Merlin. It's fairly easy for me to say that because the Arthur in Camelot is very generic, very one-note hero character. The Arthur in this one, they wanted to give him a little bit of depth. They gave him that, you know, the son of a fallen knight, trying to redeem his honor, and, you know, came with some bad people, but he's actually trying to be a good person. But he comes off extremely one note. Just like, except for him stealing the sword, everything he does is uber goody goody. Like, he's just always helpful and always trying to do the right thing and always nice and always looking out for Nimawe. And it's just like, it's a little much. Whereas, like, the one in Merlin had depth to him. He was a rich royal snob raised by the crazed Uther Pendragon to hate people of magic and hate all these things. And only through his interactions with Merlin and Guinevere and being their friend did he become the good, moral Arthur of legend. And that was far more interesting and far more compelling than either version that we saw in Camelot or Cursed. As for Merlin, the best version of Merlin is BBC's Merlin, because it's really hard to beat out when you're the main character, especially of a series that had 5 seasons. But it's also, like, he had the most interesting stuff to him. He's had character development, he had a relationship, he had life. I would say the one from Cursed here is the second best. He has some interesting things about him. I like the fact that he didn't have magic, but was still using his reputation to get himself advantages, and that he was using his mind to manipulate people and work people against each other without actually needing magic. Plus, him being the person who created the sword and knowing how dangerous it is and having been corrupted by it himself adds a lot to it. But it's not a lot to work with in this. It doesn't feel like a fully formed character. Like, there's just too many questions about him that, you know, hopefully would have gotten explored in deeper seasons, but never gonna happen. So, and I don't know. And then you have the one in Camelot who is just a drug addict. That magic is this drug, and if he does magic, he has a good chance of just murdering random people for reasons. Like, it was an interesting concept, but it wasn't great. There's no Guinevere in Cursed at all, unless she turns out to be that red spear woman who rescued Arthur at the end. So there's no point in talking about that one. The most interesting version of Morgana is actually from the one from Camelot. She is the one that fit the mold the best. She had a good, you know, you knew who she was, where she was coming from, what her motivation is, why she was doing the things that she was doing. And you sympathized with her to an extent, but also saw her as the monster that she is. The one in this show is very, very one note. She is extremely just the best friend / possible love interest for Nimawe because she's a lesbian for reasons. Like, there's no real reason that she's a lesbian. It doesn't come up too much, but it's there, and I guess that means that she's a possible love interest. She doesn't do much of anything. Like I said, the most interesting thing is she somehow becomes the widow at a certain point, but I don't know what that means or what that actually entails. So the one from the BBC is sadly the weakest of it, which is sad and really disappointing because the BBC wins in every other regard, But as far as Morgana goes, they really dropped the ball with that one. And they started out really great. Like, BBC's Morgana starts out amazing. And then as she goes on, like, once she leaves the show for a few episodes and then comes back, and then somehow off stage she just went full on psychopath and is just like, I'm gonna murder everybody and I'm gonna be queen and I'm gonna slaughter humans. And it's like, wait, because they did a whole good job of setting up who she is and that she's this good person, that she's trying to protect her people, that, you know, that the Uther is slaughtering the Fae in droves, and if he found out about her, he would slaughter her, and she was trying to do that. And then the next time we see her, she's just full on cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and it's just, ugh. As for Nimawe, the lead from Cursed, she's easily the best version of Nimawe is Cursed, because again, much like Merlin, she's the main character of this, so she has more time to be developed and more time things to do. Also, she's the only Nimawe in this that really is of importance in any of the versions. Nimawe in Camelot is the daughter of the blacksmith that made Excalibur, and she tries to run away with Excalibur after Merlin murders her father, and then Merlin murders her and takes the sword. And then in BBC's Merlin, Nimawe is the girlfriend of Merlin who ends up dying and becoming a lake spirit, and all she does in the rest of the series is hide the sword and then return it to Merlin when he asks for it. So yeah, easily the best version of Nimawe is this one, but that's not even really a good competition, because again, she's in one episode of the other two shows versus all 10 episodes of this. So best version of Uther Pendragon was BBC's Merlin. It's like, you're not going to beat Anthony Head as Uther Pendragon, the guy who also played Giles from Buffy. He's just chewing the scenery as hard as he can, working it all really well. Uther in Camelot is in first 10 minutes, and he's killed by Morgana. So, Uther in this one comes off as an extremely whiny baby brat. Like, I want power! I want it now! Give me my sword! That's kind of how he comes off for the whole thing. It just does not work. Like, they wanted to make him kind of threatening and kind of scary, and he just comes off as a whiny baby the entire time. Overall, my thoughts on the shows and which ones I would recommend and which ones I won't. So the one I would recommend the most is BBC's Merlin. For starters, it is a complete show. It's 5 seasons. It has a full arc. You get full character development. It also has the best versions of all these characters. It has a really good, idea of what it is and what it's doing and what it wants to tell. It doesn't get heavy-handed with its message, unlike Cursed, which really wanted to hammer home the racial genocide of the Fae people. The only weakness that Merlin has in comparison to the other shows is that Merlin does not have the best fight scenes. Its fight scenes are not quite as good. Its fight scenes are alright, but it's definitely did not have the budget to do like the giant fight scenes that Camelot and Cursed did. But I think they did really well with what they had, and I will gladly take all of the other stuff over good fight scenes. And it's also, they have the weakest Morgan Le Fay, but even still, it's like she gives a decent enough performance. I just dislike the fact that they had a great start of a character and then they just went to the old well of, she's a crazy woman. My second choice would actually be Camelot. And that's kind of interesting, because after the first few episodes of Cursed, I was thinking that I can never recommend Camelot now after starting Cursed, because everything that Camelot did, Cursed was doing better. It had better fight scenes, better story, better choreography, better shot, and more interestingly put together. But by the end of it, I was completely flipped and thought the other way, because Camelot feels like a complete story. It has a full kind of feeling to it. And it doesn't feel like a slog to watch. It feels like a fun, action-packed film that just happens to be a little long. But it's like, you see everything that's going on, it's compelling and it's interesting. Whereas Cursed, I lost interest about halfway through and it was really hard to keep watching. So, yeah. Cursed has its moments, it has its strengths, it has some stuff that it does really interesting well, but between the overly complicated plot, the characters that were hard to follow, the loss of interest partway through the show, and then also the terrible ending all drag this to be the worst of the three. So yeah, no, I would say definitely if you can only watch one of these, it would be BBC Merlin. But that is just my opinion. What do you guys think? Do you like some of these series? Did you dislike some of these series? Was there some Arthurian series that you would like me to talk about in this format? Let me know in the comments below. Happy watching, happy reading, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye!